The Seattle rain didn't just fall. It punished. It was a relentless, icy onslaught that soaked through the fibers of my black wool dress and turned my hands into numb, pale marble. I stood there, a solitary figure in a landscape of grey and brown, staring at the fresh, raw dirt that now covered my 8-year-old son, Caleb. I didn't open an umbrella. I didn't feel the cold. I felt as though the rain was the only thing holding me upright, pinning me to the earth so I wouldn't simply float away into the void. I was alone. No family stood beside me. No friends held my hand. There was only the priest, an elderly man whose vestments were heavy with moisture, looking at his watch as if he had a more important appointment with a dry cup of tea. I kept waiting. I kept looking toward the cemetery gates, expecting a car to skid through the mud. I imagined my mother rushing out, her face streaked with tears, apologizing for the traffic. I imagined my sister, Britney, stumbling through the grass in her designer heels, breathless and grieving. But the only sound was the rhythmic, hollow thud of the rain hitting the mahogany casket. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Once. Twice. Then it became a relentless, vibrating stream of notifications. For a fleeting, desperate second, my heart leaped. Maybe they're lost, I thought. Maybe they're trying to find the plot. I pulled the phone out with stiff fingers. It wasn't a text. It was an Instagram notification. I tapped the screen, and the grey, somber cemetery vanished. It was replaced by a burst of sunlight, crystal, and manicured luxury. There they were, my mother, my father, and Britney. They were sitting in a glass-walled conservatory that looked like a greenhouse for billionaires. The table was draped in white linen, overflowing with seafood towers and sweating bottles of expensive champagne. They were laughing. They were clinking mimosa glasses. The caption, written in a bright, obnoxious pink font, read, "New beginnings. Cheers to our future. Dream home number 1. #blessed #family first." They weren't stuck in traffic. They weren't grieving. They were at brunch, celebrating the very second I was putting my son in the ground. They were toasting to the money he left behind, the $1.5 million trust fund my late husband had set up for Caleb's future. To them, my son's death wasn't a tragedy. It was a lottery win. I froze. I watched as the gravediggers began their work, shoveling the final layers of earth over my child. And across town, my family was celebrating his death like it was a payday. Before I tell you how I burned their new beginning to the ground, drop a comment. If your family skipped your child's funeral to toast their own wealth, would you ever speak to them again? Let me know where you're watching from. I need to know I'm not alone in this world today. I drove home in a silence so heavy it felt like a physical weight. No radio. No tears. My apartment was exactly as I had left it, quiet, cold, and smelling faintly of the lavender detergent I used on Caleb's sheets. His room was down the hall, the door slightly ajar. I couldn't go in. I couldn't look at the half-finished Lego castle on his rug or the drawing of a superhero he'd left on his desk. Not yet. Grief is a suffocating blanket, but what I felt now wasn't grief. It was clarity. Cold, sharp, surgical clarity. They hadn't just skipped a funeral. They had declared war on a ghost. I sat at my kitchen table and opened my laptop. I didn't go to social media. I logged into the trust fund's secure portal. My breath hitched as the screen refreshed. Pending transaction. $150,000. Description. Non-refundable earnest money deposit. 42, Oakwood Drive. I stared at the timestamp. 10 a.m. The exact moment the priest had started the Lord's Prayer. While I was bowing my head in the rain, someone was accessing my son's legacy. I clicked the authorization details. The digital signature read, Rebecca Bennett. They had forged my signature. Britney had my old passwords from years ago when she helped me set up my accounts. They thought I was too broken to notice. They thought I was a walking wound that would never heal. I dialed the real estate agency listed on the transaction. A woman named Rebecca, the irony wasn't lost on me, answered on the second ring. "Oh, congratulations, Rebecca," she gushed before I could even introduce myself. "Your sister was so excited. She told us how much you wanted to surprise your parents with this mansion. Just a reminder, that $150,000 is hard money. It's completely non-refundable if the remaining $1.35 million isn't wired within 14 days. But with the trust fund, that's just a formality, right? Right, I said, my voice as steady as a heartbeat. 14 days. I understand. I hung up. The reality settled over me like armor. My parents didn't have $150,000. To make that deposit, they had liquidated their retirement accounts. They had bet every cent they owned on the assumption that I would be too weak, too grieving, or too stupid to stop them. I remembered 3 years ago. Caleb was gasping for air, his asthma worsening in the humid summer. I had begged my father for $50 for an inhaler. He had looked at me with pure disdain, telling me I needed to learn fiscal responsibility. 2 days later, he bought Britney a new car because her unpaid internship required reliable transport. They had watched my son struggle to breathe and called it a life lesson. Today, they were watching him be buried and calling it a fresh start. They had handed me the detonator to their entire lives, and they didn't even know I was holding the match. The next morning, the pounding on my door felt like a physical assault. I was sitting on the floor, surrounded by Caleb's toys, unable to tape the boxes shut. I stood up, smoothed my black dress, the same one I had worn to the cemetery, and opened the door. They poured in like a toxic flood. My mother, Patricia, led the charge, carrying a casserole dish. Her eyes weren't red from crying, they were bright and manic with greed. My father, Richard, followed with a bottle of wine. Britney brought up the rear, her eyes glued to her phone, looking like she'd just spent 3 hours at a salon. "We were so worried about you," my mother exclaimed, bypassing a hug to set the food down. "You left the cemetery so quickly. We tried to catch you, but you were gone." "I was burying my son," I said. The words were heavy stones, but they didn't even ripple the surface of their excitement. "I know, sweetheart, I know," my father said, clapping a hand on my shoulder. It felt performative. "But we can't dwell on the darkness. We have to think about the future. We have to think about the living." Britney sat on my sofa, careful not to wrinkle her cream-colored trousers. She looked around my modest apartment with her signature sneer. "We have news, Rebecca. Amazing news. We found it. The house. It's perfect. It even has a guest suite for you, so you can finally get out of this place." I looked at them. Really looked at them. They weren't here to comfort a mother. They were here to close a deal. "The house," I repeated flatly. "The one you put a deposit on yesterday while I was at the cemetery." My father stiffened. My mother didn't miss a beat. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to that reasonable teacher tone she used when she was about to demand the impossible. "Rebecca, listen. We need to be practical. That trust fund, it was for Caleb's future. But Caleb is with the angels now. He doesn't need college tuition. He doesn't need a safety net. But your sister does. She needs a home that reflects her brand. And we need a place to retire." "Mom," I warned. "Don't be selfish, Rebecca," she plowed ahead. "You had 8 years of happiness with Caleb. You had your turn. You had your blessing. Now it's Britney's turn. Don't hoard wealth for a ghost when your living family is struggling. It's what Caleb would have wanted. He would want his aunt to have her dream home, wouldn't he?" The air left the room. This wasn't just greed. It was a sick entitlement that erased my son's existence and replaced him with a transactional value. To them, Caleb wasn't a person. He was a lottery ticket that had finally cashed out. "You think I'm hoarding it?" I whispered. "We think you're irrational with grief," my father interjected. "That's why we're here to help you make the right decision before the lawyers get involved. We need to release the full $1.5 million today. The market is moving fast." I let my shoulders slump. I let my face crumble, not into the rage I felt, but into the defeat they expected. I can't handle the paperwork. It hurts too much to look at the accounts." My mother's face blossomed into a triumphant smile. "We know, baby. We'll handle everything. Just tell us yes." "Yes," I lied. "But my lawyer, Walter, he handles the trust. He won't release a dime without a formal meeting. Fine, my father said, checking his watch. Call him. We can be there in an hour. Make it 2, I said. I need to change. Walter's office was a fortress of glass and steel overlooking the Seattle skyline. It was a room designed to make people feel small. My family walked in like they owned the zip code. Britney was practically vibrating, clutching a Zillow printout of the mansion like it was a holy text. Walter sat at the head of the mahogany table. He didn't smile. He was a shark in a $3,000 suit. I had briefed him an hour ago. I told him about the forgery. I told him about the brunch. I told him about the hard money deposit. He hadn't flinched. He just opened a red file and said, "Let's close the deal." "Thank you for being so quick," my father said, trying to sound authoritative. "We're on a tight timeline." "I understand," Walter said. He slid a stack of documents across the table. It was 40 pages of dense, legal jargon. "This is the Asset Transfer and Caretaker Protocol. It outlines the terms of the property acquisition and the trust's role. I need every page initialed and a formal signature on the final addendum." I watched them. I watched my mother sign with a flourish. I watched Britney initial pages without reading a single word. They didn't ask what Asset Transfer Protocol meant. They didn't question why the document was so thick. They saw the $1.5 million check sitting at the end of the table and they grabbed the pens. They smiled as they signed away their lives. When it was my turn, I hesitated. A small part of me, the daughter who used to want their love, flickered. Then I remembered the sun-drenched photo of the mimosas. I remembered the rain on Caleb's casket. I signed. Britney snatched the check the moment the last staple was pressed. She was ecstatic. My parents hugged each other, already discussing which caterers to hire for the housewarming party. They left without a glance back at me. They never read paragraph 4. 3 weeks later, the social media storm was relentless. Britney posted house tours. She showed off the marble foyer, the heated pool, and the champagne room. My parents were posing in the gardens. I wasn't invited to a single dinner. I wasn't mentioned in a single post. I was the bank, and the bank had been emptied. Or so they thought. On day 30, reality arrived in the form of a legal courier. It wasn't a deed. It was a notice to cure or quit. They stormed into Walter's office 2 hours later, screaming. Britney was hysterical, clutching a letter from the IRS. My father was red-faced, slamming his fist on the mahogany table. "What is this?" he roared. "The house isn't in our names. It's in the name of the Caleb Foundation." Walter leaned back, his expression bored. "If you had read paragraph 4 of the agreement you signed, you would have seen that the trust did not gift you the money. The trust purchased the property as a charitable asset. You were designated as live-in caretakers, nothing more." "Caretakers?" Britney shrieked. "I told my followers I bought this." "Furthermore," Walter continued, "since you are living in a multi-million-dollar property for free, the IRS classifies that fair market rent as taxable income. You each owe taxes on an estimated $15,000 a month in benefits. And since you liquidated your retirement for the deposit, you have no way to pay those taxes, do you?" My mother looked like she was having a heart attack. "Rebecca, fix this. You're our daughter." "I was your daughter when I was burying my son in the rain," I said, stepping into the light. "But you were busy with mimosas. You signed the contract. You wanted the house. You have it. But you can't sell it. You can't borrow against it. You can't claim equity. You are employees of my son's foundation. We'll just leave." Britney cried. "You can," I said. "But the $150,000 deposit you stole from Caleb's account? That was classified in the contract as a user fee for the caretaker position. If you leave, that money stays with the foundation. You'll be homeless and bankrupt." I handed them a secondary notice. "Also, the party photos Britney posted? That violated the quiet enjoyment clause of the caretaker agreement. You have 24 hours to repair the scuffs on the floor and pay the outstanding property tax, or you will be evicted for breach of contract. They had no money. By noon the next day, they were packing their bags, sobbing as they loaded their lives back into their cars. But my father couldn't let it go. That night, fueled by rage and gin, he broke into my apartment. He thought he could plant drugs in my kitchen and call the police to have me declared an unfit trustee. He didn't know I had installed cameras the day of the funeral. The police arrested him inside my living room. He's now serving time for breaking and entering and felony possession with intent to distribute. My mother and Britney are living in a cramped 2-bedroom rental, working retail jobs to pay off the IRS debts from the mansion they never owned. The Oakwood house is empty now, but it won't be for long. Next month, it opens its doors to Caleb's house, a free retreat for families whose children are undergoing terminal cancer treatment. They wanted ownership. I gave them a cage. I walked away with the only thing they never understood. I walked away with peace. If you've ever had to become the villain just to survive your own family, you already know. The truth doesn't just set you free, it builds a foundation for the people who actually deserve it. If this story stirred something inside you, don't scroll away in silence. Tap like, it tells us these stories deserve to be told. Subscribe to Vengeful Goddess for unforgettable tales of betrayal, resilience, and justice, stories you won't hear anywhere else. Turn on the bell icon, so the next story reaches you the moment it drops. Your support keeps these voices alive. Because sometimes, revenge isn't loud, being heard is.